What's up, bros? Welcome to another Brograph Brocast. I'm Dave Koss.
And I'm Matt Milstead. Dave, you sound a little under the weather.
I'm still under the weather. Sorry.
I'm above the weather. The
yeah.
weather has no effect on me now. I have become immune to the weather. Still under it.
Didn't help that I drank massive amounts of scotch last night, but...
Scotch.
Down into my belly. So this is a podcast which is a supplement to our website called Brograph.com, which is a motion graphics tutorial site. We do Cinema 4D, After Effects, Nuke, Photoshop stuff, you name it, all around motion graphics.
Yep. That's about it.
That's about it. Yeah, so I was at the retirement party for one of my bosses last night, which that went really well. That was fun.
I was asleep.
Well, good for you. I wish I could have slept a little bit more, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. There was a bunch of people I knew there, and you know what's interesting is it's an ad agency, so we have a lot of people who are there who are from like the print industry or web, or they're just friends of people. You know, they're not necessarily people that do video stuff. And so Lance and who we talked about last week, and our other video guy Joe and myself were showing demo reels and stuff the whole night.
That's cool.
Kind of had them with we had the music and stuff going, which is on Spotify, and then we had just
Madion, I'm sure.
No. We had just like regular party music going, and then we were just playing demos with no audio.
Okay.
And we were just playing like a bunch of our reels and behind the scenes stuff, and like things about how the one about how we did the bottles and the whole deal.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to talk to people about it because you get so deep into motion graphics and 3D and design and all that, you really don't realize what a lack of understanding most people have for this stuff. And some people don't even realize that they're seeing 3D when they see it.
Yeah. So
they're not impressed because they don't think that it's 3D. They don't even understand what goes into it. So, like, for example, I was talking to somebody, and it was really hard for me to explain the concept to her of how we design those bottles that were in our little Brograph breakdown. Because I'm like, well, it's not a picture. She's like, it's not video. I'm like, no. She's like, do you take a picture and then you put it in there? I'm like, no, you don't do that either. Like, you start from scratch. Like, I'm trying to explain. I'm like, you take a picture of something and you kind of trace it, and then you go around and then you do the reflections and stuff. It's just interesting because people don't have an appreciation for it sometimes because they just can't even grasp the concept.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about that because it's like if you're a business or you're a contractor and you're trying to advertise these services, people don't even understand the service, let alone need the service.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that kind of got me thinking about that. Like, what's the easiest way to explain this to somebody? Or if you're trying to build a website, what's the easiest way to explain that or find people who need that? Because people don't even know that they need it.
Yeah.
They're like, well, we need to visualize this product. How are we going to do that? Do we take pictures of it? And sometimes it's actually easier to make a nice looking visual of a product by doing it in 3D rather than trying to set up some sort of, like a photo shoot or something. And then you take the pictures and then you get them back and you realize they weren't how you wanted them. And then you can't change them. And
that's my life right now. That's my life.
Why is that?
Just because a lot of the 3D work that I'm doing revolves around photography as well. And so like if these people aren't taking the correct pictures, then I've got to go back and I've got to shoot it correctly again, because a lot of people just don't realize, these photographers don't realize that I'm creating repeats from these files that they're taking. And so like I'll throw my offset, like you guys saw on the last tutorial that I posted, where I did this offset, and you'll see a distinct color shift between all four of my corners, and I'm like, I can't use this at all.
How is that color shift happening?
Because they're not paying attention to how it's lit. They're not paying attention. Like, they're checking the four corners and making sure that the RGB values are the same, but not, checking that there's no, highlight or gradient or something on the edges, which it's obvious just looking at it that there is. So
this isn't a lighting change. This is an actual color change.
There was a color change on some of my previous ones, and we were trying to figure it out. We spent about 2 hours trying to figure it out. Turns out there was a filter on one of the bulbs. Stupid. It's like I got this job, and I wasn't a photographer. I take pictures in my spare time when I'm on vacation and stuff, and I understand the basics of, ISO and shutter speed and all the other stuff because I have to shoot video. But, strobe lights and stuff, those are a different animal. So,
man, I'm the same way. Like I'm not sure if we talked about this before or not, but when it comes to photography, I do a lot of photography and I love photography, like still photography. But I kind of make a point to keep that as a hobby and not ruin it for myself.
Yeah, totally.
Because like motion graphics, I don't think I can ruin motion graphics for myself because it's, do what you love kind of thing. But I don't think that if I did photography every day that I would want to do it for fun anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I told my wife, I said, dude, when we have kids, which we have a kid now, this was back in the day, I said, my kid will be the only kid who has a videographer for a dad who does not take videos of his kid. Like, I'll be the only dad who is like, nah, I'll just buy the DVD at any, like, recital or something like that.
Right.
Mostly because I know I could probably just go talk to the people who are doing it, or I know the people who, like, the people who do the recital for my kid's daycare. I used to work at that place, so I get them for free, I'm sure.
Or you don't want people to know that you're the guy that does that because then they'll ask you to do it.
Right, exactly.
That's my fear with my daughter's school. Was like, I'm never going to tell anybody what I do for a living.
Yeah. My wife's a teacher, and I have been recruited quite a few times to do some videos for them, at least 2 to 3 a year. Which, whatever.
It's like, oh, okay, I see. You work at a video production company making commercials. Well, I bet you'd love to do our slideshow.
Yeah.
Well, like, you don't understand. I've done my time on slideshows.
I wouldn't.
You could do that because you do that every day, right? No, I don't.
Oh, you're a teacher. I know you'd love to teach my dog,
right,
how to do stuff.
Oh, you're an elementary school teacher? Oh, well, since you're a teacher, I bet you could teach my kid piano.
Yeah, right?
It's one of those things. Like, no, that's not exactly how it works.
Yep.
But you also had a follow-up on the tutorial. Is that right?
Yeah. There was one more thing that I wanted to add to it that I didn't actually talk about, and it's because, you can spend... On the tutorial, I said go through and clone stamp out the seams. Well, there's another way that you could do it that's a little bit faster, and depending on the material that you are trying to repeat, it may or may not work. It's the patch tool in Photoshop. It's over with the spot healing brush and healing brush tool. It's the third one down. It's called the patch tool. So basically, you highlight like the seam, using your marquee, and then you just grab the patch tool and drag and drop somewhere, and it takes a sample of that other area and kind of blends it into there. It's pretty cool, but depending on, like, if you're trying to get super crisp, like detailed, it's not going to work. The only way you're going to be able to do that is with the clone stamp. That's why I always normally stick with the clone stamp, but sometimes you can actually use the patch tool and it turns out looking really nice. So anyway, that's just an update from that.
And not necessarily super crisp.
Not super crisp, no.
Because I can't get enough of that super crisp.
Can't get... Is that still around? Golden crisp?
I don't know. Didn't they have golden crisp and super crisp?
No, I think it was golden crisp and it was smacks.
I thought, like, when they upgraded golden crisp and to have more honey, it became super crisp.
I don't remember that. I can Google it real quick.
I thought it was. You better Google it. It's very important that we find out.
Super crisp waffles. Oh. Super crisp. No, super crisp. It looks like a like a chip, like an
I
English
think maybe
chip.
they temporarily called it Super Crisp.
What's the domain .pk? Is that Pakistan?
I have no idea.
I don't know. Well,
anywho, let's talk about Reddit topics that we got in. Some more topics here. We've got Honest Abe Approves, who sent something in a couple weeks ago.
Honest _Abe approves.
So we asked for questions, and here's some of the questions. Interface customization, adding buttons to shelves, customizing hotkeys, and changing the global pop-up window, the V key little menu. So let's start with interface customization.
Okay.
Do you customize your Cinema 4D interface?
You know, I did before at my previous jobs. I did, you know, because I was working all the time, and I got tired of going up to the anytime I was like changing my anchor point, you know, I got tired of going up into the menu bar in order to do that. So I set up, I did at one point. I don't right now. I just don't, and I don't know why, because I hate myself every time. I'm all about keyboard shortcuts, but man, in cinema, I don't use many keyboard shortcuts. Like the worst at it.
And so when you go to a tool, do you usually use the Shift-C command?
Sometimes, because on the ones that I don't know where they are, like transfer, I don't know where that is. So I do Shift-C, and I type in transfer with one hand, because it's like the best one that you can type with one hand. You know, your left hand.
I do a lot of them, and, you know, I'm getting to the point now where I feel like maybe I need to come up with shortcuts and like different interfaces for different types of things I do, because there's a lot of stuff on the menu that I use in my shortcuts a lot of the time, and there's some stuff I don't really use. But then, you know, when I'm in modeling mode or something like that, I feel like I need a different set of tools. You know, if I'm working on, and you know, what I'll do a lot of the time too, just temporarily, is, you know, you can click on a menu and you can click that little double dash bar that's right on the top of it. And it'll, you know, disconnect it.
It'll
make
undock.
it a little floating. And so what I usually do with that is, if I'm going to use something a lot, I'll bring it down. Like if I'm working on modeling, I'll undock the selection menu, because I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff like loop selection, ring selection, fill path. So I'm going to be doing inverting.
You're talking about, instead of like actually going through and creating an entire new layout, you just undock it and keep it because you know you're going to be using it.
Right.
That's cool. That's a smart idea. Maybe I'll do that from now on.
A lot of times with the mesh menu too, because I'll tell you, the most confusing thing for me to remember where anything is anything that's in the damn mesh menu.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Because like I can never remember, you know, there's connect objects and delete. There's the commands, like when you're trying to do disconnects and you're trying to subdivide. There's optimize, which, you know, optimize, I feel like I should probably take out and put in its own thing, because I've been using that more and more. What else have I been using? Normals. Sometimes when you're working with a model that came from another program, you're trying to fix all your normals, and so you'll sit there doing align and reverse, and you'll try and fix your normals. Axis centers in there. I use Axis Center all the time.
Yeah, me too.
You know, especially if I'm trying to get a point center on something that I did a lot of work on, trying to recenter the points. But as far as my menu and my customized buttons, I do use separators, which it's pretty cool. They have those just little miniature slits that you can use to separate types of things. So I kind of do that to keep them a little bit spaced out.
Oh, right.
One thing that I believe by default they used to have, and it was in the bottom right over where you have like play all frames or point level animation button, all that stuff down at the bottom. They used to have by default a little audio button. and that would turn your audio on and off. And usually audio was on by default, I believe. And I think audio is off by default now, ever since, I don't know, like version 12 or 13. It didn't used to be. And a lot of times now I find myself working on a logo, or I'm trying to go sync something to music and I have to bring in a track.
Yeah.
And I will use that. For one thing, I don't use sound. Do you use sound?
No. Honestly, I don't edit that often to music.
Well, when you did, I know, back when you and I did a lot of logo work.
Yeah.
How did you go about putting your audio track in?
I didn't. Honestly, I would time it out in like Premiere or in After Effects or something. And then I would just figure out how many frames I needed each like hit to be, or each action. Like, 30 frames here, okay, have this happen. 30 frames here, have this happen,
I see.
Yeah. And then hope it lines up at the end.
Because the reason I have that button is because I used to do that all the time, and I would be trying to time stuff out. And the one thing I noticed that you can't do, if you just use a regular sound object, it does not really line up well.
Yeah.
There's like a delay, and sometimes it's not right, and you can't. Yeah, but don't believe you can go frame by frame. You can't hit the F button and the G button and go forward and backward and hear the audio. And so my method of doing it, I always do a null, and then I right click on the null and I say show track, so it opens like my dope sheet or whatever, my timeline, and then it doesn't show anything. So I'll go to view and I'll say show, and I'll turn off show animated. That way it shows everything, because show animated is on by default. So if you haven't animated anything yet, it's going to be empty. So it shows my null, and then I'll go up and say create special track, and then I'll say sound. Now when you do that, then you can, on the right side, you can put in a sound, and that gives you like super, super accurate sound. And then the other thing is that you have to do is usually by default all frames is turned on. There's that little film strip looking button in the bottom right of your timeline, and that is on by default. Now what's great about that is you'll see your entire animation play through, but if you have sound and you hit play, it's going to start going, and then the sound is going to like go faster than it can actually play in real time if you have a big scene. And so it'll kind of like go back, and like compensate. Oh, I'm too far forward, and we'll go back and just chop up the music. So you can actually turn off all frames, so that instead of messing the music up, it's playing the music and it's playing in real time. It's just skipping the frames that it can't process
right
that fast. So that's kind of audio workflow I figured I'd just throw in there while I was talking about it. But
yeah, I haven't needed to have a lot of audio in any projects. The stuff that you and I used to do, it was mostly just like 8 seconds, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, So it didn't require a lot.
Other shortcuts I use invert a lot to invert a selection.
Yeah.
Set selection I use all the time.
Set selection, what does that one do?
Set selection is the one that will, like set your selection for your textures.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like the one that you complained that I didn't use at all. I didn't name them.
You used it and you didn't name them. Because there's two ways to go about using that. There's a way to use that tool without using the tool. Yeah. And that's you drag, you take a selection of polygons and then you drag your material onto it, and then it creates one automatically. Right. But I don't do it that way. I actually select my polygons and then I click that button and I set a bunch of selection tags ahead of time. And then I go in and I put in everything, and then I name everything one by one, and then I copy and paste the text directly onto the texture. And there's kind of a tricky thing about using that, by the way, is that when you use set selection, if you already have a set selection tag selected on that piece of geometry, it will override that selection tag with your new selection. So you have to be careful. Like if you have, let's say you have a cube and you have the front side selected, and you do a selection tag, and you call it front, and then you select the back, and you hit that button again. If that first selection tag for front was selected, it'll replace it with your new one. So you have to make sure you click off of it.
Word.
I also use knife. I also put knife up there because I use that all the time. And subdivide, something that's, and so those are kind of in a section. And then scroll to first active.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful in a big project because you select something in the scene, and then it's like 40 nulls deep, and you don't know where it is in your object viewer. So you hit scroll to first active, and it just appears right there. It's cool. In your object viewer on the side, with the selection and everything. The other thing that I use is fold all and unfold all. Yeah. Which is basically kind of the same thing you would do in After Effects with the command tilde function. Yeah. I like to actually, speaking of mappings, I like to map folding and unfolding into the tilde. Or at least, I don't think you can do it exactly that way, but I at least like to put fold all in there with the command tilde. So it's the same function, the same muscle memory you'd be using for After Effects. And you can do it in here because I'm just kind of like, I don't know, I'm a neat freak with it. And I'm all anal about my organization. And I don't like having like a million different nulls and drop downs and children just sitting all over the place because it's messy. Yeah. So I'll do that. And then select children is a good one, especially if it goes very deep and you want to, let's say you've got like 100 objects, in various nulls under something, and you want to assign them all to a layer. Well, rather than opening up, like unfolding everything and having to go all the way through and select all the way down all these different objects, you can, even without folding, you can just click on your null, which is your parent object, and you could say select children, and it selects everything. Yeah. And then all you have to do after that is my next shortcut, which is add to new layer, and it just puts it right in there. So if you have a whole bunch of stuff and you're assigning it layers, you click the parent, and then you click these two buttons right here next to each other that I've had set up, and you've got everything in the layer. Yeah. Access Center.
Access Center is big.
Yeah, I use that all the time. I use Center Parent 2 a lot.
Yeah, me too.
As not to be confused with Center to Parent. Yeah. Most of the time you're going the other way.
Yeah. I used Edge to Spline a lot. That one's become one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because sometimes I do this a lot with pillows. When you're trying to create what is it called, like a tuffet or something around the edge of the pillow. It's like the little circular thing. I will take my edge all the way around the pillow. I'll do like a loop selection, and then I will do an edge to spline. I'll turn that edge into a spline, and then I'll do a sweep using a circle spline, and I'll sweep around that spline that I made using edge to spline. Yeah. And now it works awesome. It works really well.
Little Miss Muffet would love that.
Yeah. So.
And what else? Do you use connect objects and delete a lot, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, all the time. All the time.
I got that in there. Transfers in there, like you were talking about earlier.
Yep.
Instance and extrude as well. So that's what I got on my toolbar.
Yeah, mine's basic. Basic. I'm basic.
The great thing too is if you are working on something specific where you need 2 or 3 tools, but they're not necessarily something that you want in your toolbar forever. If you are doing the Shift C thing, you can drag any of those search results up into your toolbar. Yeah. Just right there automatically. And if you don't save your layout, then they'll just disappear the next time. So
yes, you can do just like I just did it. That's cool.
Yeah, it's great because you can just, have your temporary things that you need to use for like a few minutes and click back and forth on them, and then just, you don't have to worry about them like sticking up there or something.
Neat. Super neat.
What else do we have here? So customizing hotkeys, we kind of talked about. I don't change too much. I don't like having to sit down in front of someone else's computer and I don't like to have it where I have to load all my stuff. I try and go with some of the most basic commands and keep them the way that the company intended that made them, just because I want to be able to get around in other people's projects on their computers easily. So
yeah, it's same with After Effects and Premiere, with the exception of Premiere. Premiere, I actually use the Final Cut Pro keyboard shortcuts, and I hate myself because I do it, because I should just learn the Premiere ones.
I do that, but there's a reason for that.
Why is that? What's your reason?
Because in this case, it's different because Premiere gives you that option right there.
Yeah, that's true.
They say which layout do you want.
Yeah, but still, not all of them are set up. With Premiere specifically, you've actually got to go in and change some of your settings to be exactly the Final Cut ones. Because I think, is it Shift Z or whatever, doesn't shrink your timeline down, show all the timeline. I think it's always tilde / or something like that. So, yeah.
The global pop-up window, I don't use the global pop-up window. Do you?
No.
The V key?
I just saw that and I was like, wow, I use this more often, because it's got the plugins right there, which is really nice. Instead of having to go up to my plugins or Octane or whatever, I could just hit the V key, and especially with V-Ray, it's awful having to go into V-Ray and then trying to find all the particular one that you want. Because there's so many options.
A lot of these, though, have shortcuts that I use all the time. ERT, of course. And now navigation-wise, I always use one, and I always use one to move, to translate, to move the camera around. But I don't use 3. I don't use 2 and 3.
Really?
No.
Why?
I use one only because
how do you orbit around?
I orbit by putting my pinky on the Option key.
Pinky?
Yep.
I'm trying to do this right now. I could see my...
I got the muscle memory. I can just do it without thinking.
Cow.
I don't use 3 because then I have to look for 3, kind of. My pinky naturally goes down because the way that your hand rests, where your index finger is on the F key.
Which finger is on...
My fourth finger is on 1.
Fourth finger. Which one is that one?
Your ring finger.
Okay, your ring finger is on 1.
My ring finger's on 1.
Your pinky is on Option?
Not at the same time.
Oh.
I move it down. I move it down because your index finger hits
I'm trying
F.
to do both of these. I'm like, that's impossible.
No, not at the same time. No. Okay,
so why don't you just do 1 and your thumb? Honestly,
my thumb.
Your thumb on Option, then you don't have to move anything. Man, I'm so used to 1, 2, 3 anyway.
It's because my finger rests on the F key at home row. By default, I don't move my hand from home. I move my hand back and forth there from home row. If I moved it all the way up, it would be too far from all the other keys. I know that's totally nerdy. And then, of course, I never use 2 because 2 is zoom. I always use my middle scroll button for that.
See, yeah, I don't use the middle scroll. I always feel like it goes too far, especially on some of the Magic Mouses.
Well, here's the thing about that, too. You have to have it set up right.
Yeah. See, I just use 1, 2, 3.
The reason
I'm so basic.
it will go too far because the zoom is based on what you have selected.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have let's say you have a cube and it's way in the back somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to zoom in on it, and it won't go that fast because you don't have that selected. If you select that object and then zoom in on it, it will go at a speed relative to that object. And the other thing is I always hit my ring finger on the S key, because I change all my default settings to like the way that R12 and R13 worked, which is, you know, if you zoom on something, you are zooming directly in the middle on that object. I don't like, if I have my cursor like in the top right and I zoom, I don't want it going up to zoom in onto what I have in my cursor at. I want it to zoom in on the selected object. And to me, like, that has always been way more natural. And people who have just started in Cinema 4D, I will purposely change that for them, because I'll see them struggling with navigation. And that's the hardest part about starting in 3D, is navigating.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have this set up like that, I swear by this. Like, if you are not able to have a bunch of objects in a scene, click one of them, hit S so it centers right up, and then scroll in and out and zoom in and out on it, and then rotate around it. It's maddening, because you'll have an object like in the top right of the screen, and you'll try and use the rotate tool, and it doesn't rotate correctly. And I see people just struggling with it because they don't have those settings by default. I don't know why it wasn't changed.
It doesn't bother me. Doesn't bother me at all.
What other shortcuts? Man, I'm telling you, like ERT, 1, 2, 3, if you use that, or 1 in command and to scroll, and ERT for...
And I used to use ERT all the time.
You don't use ERT?
I don't know why I don't anymore.
You know what drives me nuts, though, is that most programs do WER.
Yeah, Maya does WER.
Yeah, and Nuke does WER. But
it
ERT
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I know.
But I don't know what E means.
The thing
what does E stand for?
E is translate.
I know, but E doesn't stand for translate.
Well, no.
R is rotation. T is for transform. E is for everybody move.
T is for scale. It's just
transform. Like, that's...
Well, okay, yeah.
Photoshop, transform.
Transform. That makes sense, but it's really because the keys are next to each other more than anything.
Yeah, just use WER.
But ERT I use all the time, especially E, because you're using a different shape or a different tool or something, and you want to go back to it quickly. S, man, if you are using Cinema 4D and you're not using the S tool as part of your navigation,
I don't use the S tool.
Oh my gosh, you can work so fast if you just constantly hit S. Oh, I'm doing this thing. Click, zoom out, move over here. Click this other object. Boom, S. Then you're in this other area.
Yes.
Instead of trying to click on stuff and like scroll and translate and rotate and zoom around, it is the biggest lifesaver in the world. Especially if you're getting started in Cinema 4D, I tell people, like, use the S tool religiously, like just constantly. So.
Oh, you know what? I do use ERT. I just didn't realize it. Like, it's so ingrained in my muscle memory, I guess I didn't realize that I did.
And W as well, it stands for like world translation.
Yeah,
so you
I
can
do that as well. Holy cow. It's so funny. Like, I'm just like, I don't use those. No, I just click on the button. And then I'm like, no, I'm over here like navigating for fun. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm totally using all those keys. Wow.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I don't think that there are many more keys than that I use, other than just hitting Shift C all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, Shift C is the best. If you know the name of your tool that you want to use, Shift C it.
Yeah, it's like Spotlight for Cinema
totally.
4D. Also, Honest Abe Approves says I stumbled my way through a live presentation during our local meetup a few months ago on these topics. Same song. I wrote in this note.
Word.
I thought it was funny because and I'm pretty sure that I've seen this person's tutorials or videos before, because the intro video has the same song that I used for the aerial photography reel that I just put together. So I was like, oh yeah, nice taste.
It's a really nice opening that he did.
Yeah. So there'll be a link to that in the show notes as well. So hopefully that covered some of it.
Cool.
And now we go on to MIC 1983.
Mike, 1983. Represent. I wasn't born in 83.
Give my voice a rest.
Okay. It says UV unwrap and texturing in general and in Octane specifically would be great. How about making the finer details of textures in Octane non-procedural, manage the texture maps in a layered Photoshop file if that's possible? Does that even make sense? Did he say that or did you? You can cut that out.
No. No, he said that. Not
Okay.
No, I wasn't like. No, these are not my notes.
That was in parentheses, just
Right.
like the last thing was. Okay.
Now half of this was kind of covered in our podcast last week.
Mm-hmm.
Because we did go into some great detail on.
Yeah, totally.
Some of that.
And I'll always point people back to the Johnny Runner, Johnny Runner video.
Right. The intro to reflectance.
Yeah, totally. Because that one's a really good one.
Okay, so we talked about UV unwrap and texturing.
Yeah.
As much as we could, which wasn't much.
Yeah.
And we did refer to Octane. But as far as finer details in Octane, did we go through and talk about like the different types of diffuse, roughness, bump? We didn't really talk about that.
No, not really. No, we didn't. And I mean, other than that, you've got the materials, the Octane materials tutorial that you've done.
Right.
So, but no, we haven't specifically talked about it on the podcast.
So we talked about the layers part last week. So as far as just what there is, now one thing that a lot of people probably don't notice because it's not in the main tabs when you make a new Octane material is that there is a rounded edges option. Have you ever used that before?
In Octane?
In Octane, rounded edges. You remember that plugin that you and I think, bought a couple of years ago? And
yeah.
It just gives us very slight roundness to edges so that you don't have to bevel everything.
Yeah, that's cool.
If you're making a
I've never
countertop
seen that.
or something.
Where's that at?
It's in the basic tab where you turn on and off stuff like diffuse and roughness and bump, where you turn off the channels completely.
Uh-huh.
There's a rounded edges, and you tell it, give me like 0.3 inch rounded edge, and it will give it a little smoothness so that you don't have to sit there and try and bevel everything. And I'm sure that saves you on polygons too.
Yeah.
Because rather than creating polygons, it's just kind of faking.
That is freaking rad. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Dang, yo.
So that'll save you if you're building a bunch of stuff and you don't want to sit there and try and figure out and type in, fillet edges and the number and how many segments and all of that mess. So
yeah.
So diffuse, you got the diffuse channel, which that's RGB, and of course you got the float, and the float is a 0 to 1 value, which is a gray value, and the float does not work unless your color is set to 0 on all RGB, and then the float is a gray value, 0 being black and 1 being white. Texture, something very important under texture and diffuse is to not click those 3 dots and load a texture directly. Will it work? Will it show it? Yes.
Sure
but it
does.
doesn't
Do
work.
it all the time.
Oh, geez. That's not good.
You know what? I do it when I just need it real quick. And I know I'm not going to need to change the texture at all, because I know with image texture in in Octane you can just you can do so much with it, which is awesome, yes. But sometimes I know I won't need to rotate it or change anything, and I can just change it inside the actual material.
The thing about it though is I believe the gammas are actually different if you don't load it through
Oh, is that true?
Image texture, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
To do a test on that.
So image texture, you click on image texture first, and then you click on the black box, and then you load your file into image texture. And
once you get to know image texture, you'll find out it's amazingly incredible.
Oh yeah,
like the ability to even be able to rotate your image and stuff. That's cool. It's way cool.
And power and gamma too are nice because you got the gamma control over the blacks. But power, for example, when I was working on one of the bar scenes that I did for those liquor bottle scenes, there was a picture in the background, and I kind of had this thing. I always put, if I need artwork, I always put this painting that's in my office into the scene. And when I rendered it, or when I was about to render it, and I was looking through it, we were looking at it, and a few people were like, "Man, that picture is just really distracting in the background." And I'm like, "Well, it's really because it's like super bright and noticeable." And I didn't want to have to change the lighting because that's a big pain. Because I had the light, it was mostly natural lighting, and I didn't want to have to adjust that and bring in more light. So all I did was brought the power down, and then that just made it dark.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like being able to control the power and the gamma, and the fact that you can like invert it. That's kind of neat.
And the thing about all these channels too is it's also important to do your UV transformations within the material itself.
Yeah.
You could do like a cube or a cylinder or something every now and then, on your actual texture tag, but really you want to dig into the material and do your projection and your UV transform in here. Not only is it better that way when it comes to lining up textures and using mixed materials and making sure everything's lined up, but you're going to be able to see real-time transformations when you do your UV transform.
Yeah, totally. And if you're changing it inside of just in the material, like if you're changing the offset and the length and stuff like that in the tag, it doesn't show up in Octane. I don't think at all, does it?
You mean the change when you make the change?
Yeah,
well,
like
no.
Even if you resend your thing,
if you resend it will. Yeah, really? I mean it'll work. The problem is that you don't see it in real time, and you have to hit the button. It's got to recalculate geometry, and like why go through all that to line up a texture?
Yeah, totally.
Every single time. I mean, it will do it.
One thing I will say with when doing that in Octane, when you're changing your XYZ, make sure you change your Z, because I've had a few times when I haven't changed my Z, and what was showing up on my preview is not what showed up on my.
Right. Yeah, I've had that happen before too. And it's weird because it will show up in that viewer. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, if you are setting your custom startup screen, your custom startup layout, and you're putting your buttons up there, and you go up and you save it, and then also you at the same time you go in and say, well, take this layout and make this the startup layout. You can open up your Octane window, your live viewer, and put it where you usually keep it. I usually keep it on a separate screen, full screen. And when you save that layout, every time you open Cinema, it will open that window right there for you too.
Yeah, that is one thing that I do on my layout. I have my Octane screen automatically open. I move so basically I've got my attributes and layers or whatever on one vertical, on the right side of my screen where it would normally be, but I've moved the objects in the content browser and all that other stuff to the left side of my secondary screen, and then my Octane window fills up the rest.
And what I wish I could do with this, which I can't because Cinema crashes, and this is not just me, and this is not this machine, and it's not just this version of Cinema. This has been happening since version 12 for me. Is if you go to the window menu and you say New View Panel, and you take that panel and you put that on another screen. Now, what I want to be able to do is to have like a separate view panel that is a wide shot let's say it's a separate camera on a wide shot and it's locked down. So I could just, I could work in my perspective view in the other window, and I can move around and I can model things, but I always over here on the other side have kind of a wide shot of what it looks like. Much like you would do if you have an Octane window, just lay the land, see what it looks like. Guaranteed, since version 12 on any system, Mac at least, your cinema will crash. You will have that crash where the library something or other dies and massive meltdown crash. It will happen every time. I don't know why that is, but it's like, why have the extra viewer if it crashes everybody's computer? It's odd. Anyway, just to quickly go through the rest of them here. Roughness, most of the time, roughness is just adjusting a float value.
Yeah.
From 0 to 1 for how much blur you want.
Roughness is my favorite. That's what makes it look real.
Yep. And and now you don't have to use much roughness if you're using bump. If you're using bump, you can go into the texture and load an Octane noise. That's how you get most of your bump. And I love the Perlin. I always do like a Perlin with a 0.8 omega and like 11 or 12 octaves. It's just such a beautiful bump, and it is like universally just a great bump for anything. And then you can take that.
How much octaves and how much omega?
I usually do 12 octaves and like 0.8 omega. I always just kind of click somewhere in there and then I adjust it. And now that gives you a really strong bump. So then what you have to do and when you want a subtle bump, you have to bring the gamma down as low as it will go to like 0.01. But if you're using that, usually you won't even need to use roughness, or you need to use barely any roughness. The other thing you could do is something like that. If you do a Perlin, you're trying to do maybe like a metal, like a brushed metal look, you can click on UVW transform and then just jack up the Y.
Yeah, totally.
The Y scale.
Yeah.
And then you get a really, really nice, like anisotropic looking. Is it anisotropic or anisotropic? I know.
Anisotropic. I don't know.
Anisotropic, I think. Normals. I mean, I don't use normals that much. I like using them. There's certain times where it's like super awesome to use. And Crazy Bump will help you create normals. And now Photoshop does it.
Yeah, Photoshop.
Yeah. Displacement, if you have to use it, which... Man, that's always a beast. It's there. It's basically the same as bump.
I've used a lot of displacement for like tiles and stuff. Like when I get some of these mosaic tiles, I'll use displacement for that.
And you need it as opposed to bump?
Yeah. One thing I will say about Octane is awesome with displacement. Like, it renders it so fast.
Well, yeah, that's true in comparison to...
I don't even notice a difference when rendering displacement in Octane versus rendering displacement in like V-Ray or something. V-Ray, oh my gosh, don't even bother.
Right.
You know? But Octane, it's like, oh my, like how is it doing that fast?
Yeah, it's the same thing with refraction and reflection too. You know, it's like you can add a bunch of reflection and stuff. It doesn't make that much of a difference until you jack up the roughness.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really notice that much with roughness either.
Well, in subsurface scattering, it definitely takes a toll.
Oh, okay.
You know, because your subsurface scattering is basically coming from, jacking up your roughness on a specular material. There's more to it than that too, but just in general, if you have glass and you got roughness float all the way up to like 0.9 or something, or even 1, it not only is it going to take a long time, but you're going to start to see all the speckles in there. Then your samples have to go up. Your camera, you need to bring down your hot pixel to maybe a 0.5 or something. Yeah. Or even less. You never want to go too low with the hot pixel removal because it will look fuzzy. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, displacement, for those of you who don't really use it that much or are new, bump will do the trick 90% of the time. If you've got some tiles and they're far away, you would use bump to create those lines between the tiles. Now, if you are doing a close-up shot of some tiles, or like stone tile, or like where there's more depth to it, then you actually have to use displacement because you're making actual geometry.
Yes.
I don't use opacity much. Opacity. I never say it right. You know why I never say it right?
Because I said it wrong one time, and then someone corrected me, and I'm like, no, I don't think that's right.
No, I had a teacher who said it the other way because he had an accent.
Oh, it's funny.
Yeah.
I call it opacity, I think, sometimes.
See, I do the same thing.
You know what I wish Octane had?
What?
A multi-shader.
Right. Yeah, I know.
I would kill for a multi-shader in Octane. Like, literally tell me who to murder and I will murder them. That's not true. Many people.
Yeah, maybe hopefully they'll do that on the next version.
Or just let me use the Mograph shaders, you know? If they would let me use the Mograph shaders.
Yeah, I wonder if that's some sort of limitation or something. I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard.
I guess we won't get into everything here as much. Emission, that's basically your luminance. I'm skipping some of these, but emission is luminance, essentially. And the way that
it's a little weird. It's weirder than regular luminance.
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of settings that you have to tweak to get it right.
Yeah, it's awful. Okay, maybe you can talk to me about this.
Okay.
Explain to me, what is it? Your. Sorry, I'm looking at one of my thing. What it's called? Where it's even lighting or normal lighting. Dang it.
Normals?
No, it's not normals.
You're talking about normals on a light?
No.
Or on a emission?
Emission texture. Say you do an emission texture.
Were you talking about surface brightness?
No, normalize. Talk to me a bit about normalize.
Well, normalize, you got to think of it like a wave file. Okay. When I do this podcast, the two of us have pretty different waveforms. We're in two locations on two different microphones, right? Now, there's a difference between compression and normalization, too. Compression is actually taking everything and like stretching the wave out so that it's at the peak is as high as it can go to where everything's at zero all the time. It's what they do in radio so that everybody's song sounds the exact same volume. Everybody's song is going to sound zero. Now, normalization is taking the peak of whatever waveform you have. So let's say I'm recording, like I'm looking at my waveform on my screen right now, and I can tell that everything I'm saying, none of it's hitting zero. None of it is stretching all the way to the top of my recording block.
Right.
Like my track,
right.
So it's going to take, when I normalize it, it's going to take the peak, the highest, the loudest thing that I basically said, and it's going to make that 100% at zero.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of, in a way, if you can try and take that and visually think about that with light, that's kind of what that is doing.
So do you use it a lot? Like, do you normalize all your stuff?
It's on by default, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I just usually put that on by default. I just leave it on by default.
That is.
Feedback?
It's something in my desk.
See, I told you about that a long time ago.
Yeah,
you can always hear your desk is like reverberating. You got all those fans and junk going. It's funny. But so all right, so emissions. So on emissions, do you understand surface brightness? Have you used that before?
Yeah, well, surface brightness, I think that's what I use normally whenever, normally in just a standard renderer, whenever I'm creating material and I want to, like, say I'm doing a phone and I want to have the screen show up super bright or whatever. I'll use the luminance channel. Well, surface brightness is normally what I click on whenever I'm doing that.
So here's what all surface brightness does. All surface brightness does is bases the amount of emission on how much surface area there is on an object. So if you have a screen and it's 50 inches tall, it's going to be putting out a massive amount of light. And if you scale it all the way down to like an inch, it's going to be super dark.
Okay.
Whereas if you did not have that on, it would be putting out the same amount of light no matter what size it was.
Okay.
So an example of this is, let's say that you are creating like a little strip, like a little light strip that's going around something, and it's really thin. Most of the time, if you had surface brightness on, it's so small that it wouldn't be putting out enough light. So you would have to uncheck it in order to really jack it up. And you can control the amount of light and make it look pretty much the same if you have surface brightness on or if you don't. You know, like if it's too dark, you can turn up the power.
Yeah.
Right? But the problem that you run into is sometimes if you don't have surface brightness on, it's super, super bright. And when you're adjusting your float for that, which is your power, you're going to be down to like the minute, like 0.001, 0.002. And you're going to be so far down in that slider bar that it's really hard to control without doing like option click. And if you turn on surface brightness, it's a little more controllable in that you can use your entire slider bar.
Interesting.
So, you know, that's something like if something is too bright or it's too dark, that is the first thing that I would do is just see if you need to use that or not.
Okay. I guess I've been using it wrong this whole time.
And two, if you have an object that is actually getting bigger or smaller, and you want the brightness to increase, you know, I don't know exactly what that would be, but let's just say you have an orb or something and it's really small, and then all of a sudden it like, you know, just blows up or something. Yeah, that's gonna have to have surface brightness on because it would get brighter as it got bigger. And the way you use it is you go to emission and you go to your texture and you load an Octane texture emission. And then once you have that loaded up, you have a couple different options. You can put a texture in there. Usually all I do is under texture, I just load an Octane RGB spectrum and I just put in a color because most of the time I just want to make it emit a cool color. You know, but then of course if you're doing like what we would call luminance channel in the regular render engine in the regular materials, that's when you would load your image. So instead you would go to Octane and do an image texture. Yeah. So and then cast illumination is something in there that you've got to work with. Depending on if you want it to be giving off light onto other objects. It's still going to have its own illumination. It's still going to be illuminated. It's still going to show up in reflections. But sometimes, like say you had a yellow strip going around something, if it was putting out too much yellow spill on the stuff around it and you didn't want it to affect the lighting really around it, you would just turn that off. Yeah. And then distribution, you can put a float on as well to control how far the illumination would go if you had that on. And of course, sampling rate is in there. And if you haven't heard about sampling rate, I won't really get into that much. I do talk about it in my lighting tutorial about how sample rate works. And you have to make sure that you understand what a sampling rate of a light is. Because if you don't, you're going to get horrible, speckly, you know, nasty looking renders, and you're going to wonder why, and you're just going to jack up your sample rate on your render engine instead, and it's going to take a really, really long time, whereas you could have just gone in and made sure that your sample rates were correct in relation to each other. You have to think of them as ratios. Okay. If you got 3 lights, let's say, and they're all set to 100, and your render sample rate is 300, it's going to devote 100 samples to each of those 3 lights. If you have one of those lights set to 1 and the other two set to 100, it's going to put, like, out of that 300, it's going to divide it up. And it, if you think about it in terms of ratios, it's going to give everything that it has to those two lights, and then like barely anything, like down to the, let's put it, I guess a little bit easier. Let's say you have two lights, right? And you're rendering at 100 samples, just to make it super easy. By default, you've got two lights that are 100 samples apiece. Mm-hmm. It's going to devote 50 samples of your render to one light and 50 to the other, right? Mm-hmm. If you have two lights and you've got 100 samples, and one of the lights has only one sample and the other one has, let's say, 99, it's going to devote 99 samples to the one and one to the other. And this doesn't only affect it if it's in the scene, like at what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. And that's what you have to keep in mind, because let's say you have a bunch of lights outside of a room and they're in the hallway, mm-hmm. and they are set to 100 samples, but you're focusing on something that's inside the room on the table, and you have a light there and it's set to 100 samples. Mm-hmm. They're both set to 100 samples. The other one, that's barely affecting your scene. It's lighting the room a little bit, but it's barely affecting your scene. So when you get your camera up on whatever that is on the table, mm-hmm. and you're rendering at 100 samples, you're only getting 50 samples to your table. Because that other light is way back there hogging up 100. Mm-hmm. Or hogging up 50 of them because it's set to 100. So you would go to that light and say, that's not as important. Only throw like 10% over there or 1%, because mm-hmm. I want like 99 of my samples going to this table. I don't want it being hogged. And that's something that I could not figure out at first. And once I did that, then all of a sudden all my like real dark nighttime-ish scenes mm-hmm. were so much better.
Huh. Interesting. I didn't know that.
And to wrap it up, you've got you've got gloss, and that's everything in diffuse. If you go to glossy, it adds a couple things. Your index, for example, if your index is at 1, that's mirror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything above that, 1.001, is like no reflection at all the way up to 8, which I don't know why 8 is the number, but that's your amount of reflection. And it's the same thing that applies to glass if you're doing a specular. Mm-hmm. But then also in specular, you have transmission. And transmission is where you're subtracting the colors from a piece of glass. Like if you want a piece of blue glass, then you go to transmission and you jack up your blue, and then you've got blue glass. It's pretty easy. And then something real important when you do these glossy textures, if you are rendering in direct lighting, you must go to the fake shadows tab and turn on fake shadows. Mm-hmm. If you don't do that, everything's going to be black.
Yep. It's almost like in the render settings in the standard renderer, not turning on what is it called? Like something, evaluate transparency. Mm-hmm. That's almost exactly what happens.
And it's a shortcut is what it is, because when you use direct lighting, it's assuming that glass thing that it's hitting is a solid surface that is not transparent.
Correct.
So you get a whole bunch of things in an area, all of a sudden everything behind it's going to get dark because the light's not getting through. Mm-hmm. It's treating it like a solid. So fake shadows is kind of a workaround to where the light just pretends that object is not there at all, as far as blocking light, as far as the bounces, because you're not using PMC or path trace.
Mm-hmm. I like the way PMC looks, or path tracing looks.
Yeah.
It just takes forever. It's a shame.
Now let me, I guess, finish up this question mm-hmm. By starting with you, actually.
Okay.
The rest of this question is perhaps a workflow from C4D to your compositing software like AE. What you tend to render layer wise to composite, and also a nice little compliment here. By the way, your tutorials are some of the best for clarity I've ever seen. Really helpful stuff. So,
appreciate that very much.
So tell me, because I've been talking plenty, it's your turn now.
I just want you to get your, that exercise for your,
right.
You're sick enough. You're gonna walk off the
right.
the hurt.
Walk it off. So tell me what your workflow is when it comes to going between Cinema 4D and After Effects and doing render passes and layers, and what your workflow is in setting that up.
Well, depending on which one I'm working on, which render engine I'm working on. Like the other day I was working in Octane and I texted you and I said, hey, have you ever had this problem where I was rendering out an object buffer through Octane? And you're like, no, just throw it into the standard renderer, render out an object buffer like that. And that kind of like, it was like, oh, well, that's so stupid. That's so simple. Why am I wasting all this time? Because you've got to do like, I think it's like 125 samples or something like that per object buffer in Octane, when you can just render one out in like literally less than a second in the standard renderer, which is just great. And I don't know if it'll work that way in V-Ray, because V-Ray's camera is kind of weird.
It's different. It lines up differently.
It does. And it's really annoying. I ran into a big problem with that this weekend.
You'll go do an object buffer and it doesn't match.
Correct.
The kind of sucky thing is actually Octane used to be able to render that object buffer, the Cinema 4D object buffer, while you were doing a regular render.
Interesting.
And nice I like
that. They still could.
I mean, you've probably done this before. How many times do you do an object buffer and you realize you put it in the wrong place, or you didn't do it right, or you needed to add another object to the same buffer?
Yeah.
And you don't want to re-render the entire scene.
Yeah, totally. And this is something that you taught me a long time ago. Set up your object buffer. Don't click on save or whatever for your regular thing.
Right.
And just turn off your transparency, your reflection, turn it all off.
Right.
And
even your lighting and textures.
Totally. It renders in seconds.
Yeah.
So, but then I'll normally render out as many object buffers as possible in order to, because sometimes I was doing a phone spin for some T-Mobile phone or something like that, and they didn't like the way the color was coming out. It was nice because I rendered out an object buffer on the back panel and like the metallic texture around it. I was able to take that into After Effects and use my object buffer and color correct just the individual areas, the way I wanted,
right,
which is cool. And then without having it adjust anything else. Now, but one thing, with After Effects being incorporated into Cinema 4D, or Cinema 4D being incorporated into After Effects now, it's cool that you can bring in your project and that you can extract all the information, but man, every now and then I find that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work correctly, and I've struggled with this so many times where I'm trying to put like I've got a phone and I want to replace the screen, So I'll create a solid the exact same size, or I'll click on my screen and I'll add a compositing tag and I'll make it the size of the screen. I'll create a solid or whatever, and I'll bring it into After Effects, and then I'll extract the stuff, and it just won't work. It won't line up correctly. But then I'll go through and I'll do the save 3D information or whatever, compositing in After Effects.
The AEC file.
Yeah, and I'll bring that in, and sometimes that'll work. Sometimes it won't work, So it's like, what's really annoying is having to figure out which one will work first before you start doing it.
Well, AEC will always work.
not always.
If it's set up right. And I'll tell you exactly why that is. There's a tutorial called The Importance of Orientation.
That you did?
Yes. And I'm not talking about your sexual preference.
Right.
If you do not have your XYZ on the object set correctly in relation to the scene, it won't work right.
Yeah, you're probably right with that.
That's exactly what it. And if you go watch the tutorial, I showed the example of how it doesn't work and how it does work, just by having the Z axis in the right place.
Well, what I found was whenever I was doing it wrong, if I went into my orientation in After Effects and just adjusted that, it seemed to work fine.
And honestly, I've given up on Cineware.
Yeah.
I gave up on it a long time ago. It's not worth the time. The rendering is slow.
It's cool that you can extract everything. Really, that's all I use it for. You know?
I've used it to like do visualization, you know, where I'm trying to set up a scene that's got green screening and stuff in it and like a camera track. And I'm trying to match some stuff up and I'm trying to block it.
Yeah.
But then after I get to a certain point, like, and that's because I've got it on the fast shade or whatever. But after that, I'm done. I turn it all off and I do it the old way.
Yep.
Now, I really like to get a scene set up the way I like it, get everything, pretty close. Not even textured, but just as far as blocking and stuff. And I'll render out a hardware pass. And when I render out the hardware pass, I just quickly bring that and dump that into After Effects. And let's say it's like 240 frames, right? Or sometimes even, if I just want to get the project set up and I don't even want to do that, I will render two things. Number one, I'll go in and I'll render frame 0 and frame 1, like from 0 to 1. If you don't do that and you render 0, it's not gonna put a number on the image sequence. So I render 0 and 1, and then I have it render the last frame, because when you bring it into After Effects, it'll bring in the whole image sequence. And there's a setting.
It'll say that it's missing stuff, but it's fine.
There's a setting in After Effects since CC or CC 2014. You can tell it not to tell you that all the time.
Yeah.
So you uncheck that and it will bring it in. So you at least have the groundwork. And then you can go in and let's say you want to tweak it. You can make sure the animation looks good. You can go to like frame 20 and render one frame 100 and render another frame in full res, and then just refresh your image sequence in After Effects and then start tweaking on that to make sure that your composition is good, that your object buffers are working, that your all your different layers and color correction look the way you want. And it's kind of this back and forth nonlinear way of working using those different pieces. And those are multipass, not multi-layered files. I always do PSD, TIFFs, not multi-layered, and
I don't mind the multi-layered files. I've brought them into After Effects before, and it's nice being able to see all the individual files. But most of the time, I do non-layered files.
I use non-layered files if I'm doing Nuke. And when I'm doing Nuke, you can do those, what do you call them? EXR files.
Yeah.
And it's so much easier because when you're working in there, you can bring in one node and just say, and you can see all of the channels. Yeah. And just drag out of those channels to everything from the one node. And say, oh, take this object buffer here and this thing here. And it also is able to translate the object buffer as an alpha in its own way, instead of you having to either do a Luma or use the set mat.
Yeah.
That you have to do in After Effects to get an alpha channel.
Yeah. I mean, that's mostly what I do in After Effects and Cinema 4D.
Any other workflows, things like what? Tell me this. What do you add most of the time as soon as you get your render into After Effects?
I'll do I I do an adjustment layer and I throw RSMB on it.
Default RSMB.
Yeah, totally.
Boo. I render.
I know you do.
A vector pass, and I do it the right way.
I know you do. And then I'll also do another adjustment layer, add a curves onto it so that I can add kind of a small vignette to it as well. That's mostly just the basic stuff that I use.
And RSMB is really great, and I use it most of the time.
And it's so much better than the pixel motion blur.
Except in Octane.
It's faster.
Octane's motion blur is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It is absolutely phenomenal. It looks so good, but you really have to know what you're doing because there's a lot when it comes to shutter speed and everything that you have to do, or else it won't look right.
Mm-hmm.
But really, RSMB gives you so much control after the fact, so you don't have to go re-render.
Totally. When the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, when they were originally being asked to do, the dinosaurs in 3D, they didn't actually ask them to do it in 3D. They were wondering if they could put motion blur on some puppets that they were doing or some claymation stuff or something. And they said, let me show you something we've been working on. And that's like, that changed the entire thing. You know, they were really just trying to put motion blur on puppets. And they decided to go the whole 3D route. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Something else I wanted to add to that too is the node editor. Have you ever used the node editor in Octane?
No, I haven't. Nodes scare me.
Well, I don't like using it all the time, and I don't always have a reason to use it, but the one thing that is convenient about it is being able to have a noise that is universal. So let's say you're doing like 10 different textures, and they all have a lot of different things going on, like the reflection's different, and maybe, I don't know, the transmission is different, or whatever it is. But they all have the exact same noise. Well, you can have one noise that you set up, and then you connect that node into the bump channel of all of those textures.
That's cool.
And you just change the one. And no matter which one you're on, later on, you don't even have to be in the nodes. Let's say you just open a texture, you adjust that bump. And because it's controlled by that, it will automatically adjust on all the others.
That's really cool. I may have to try that out.
You know, imagine you had like 20 textures and they all had that bump, and then you realized that you needed to change all of them. That's a lot of work to change them all one by one. So,
yeah.
So, do you want to talk about the job thing today? Or you want to wait till the next one?
Let's wait till next week.
Wait till the next one.
This one's been going pretty long. I mean, we're almost at like an hour and a half or something.
Yeah. So, there's a couple other things here. Let's see. Let me put that job thing. I'm putting that into next week right now so that we don't forget.
Totes.
And
the job thing is mostly for the new. So just a preview. Mm-hmm. It's for the new guys. You know, basically the theme is you got your first job out of college or whatever. It's your first, full-time gig. What are some things that you can do to be successful? So that's next week.
That's next week, and it's going to go really well with some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about as far as contracting. Mm-hmm. And we have a few people lined up that we're going to try and talk to on the show. Next week, who do we have next week?
Is he going to be on next week?
Sure.
Lance going to be on next week?
No, Lance will be on at some point, but who are...
a college buddy of mine, his name's Chad Trainer. He's a big production guy, After Effects guy. I don't think he's going to be on next week, but he will be coming on in the next few weeks. He's in France.
Oh, that's right. Oh, he was supposed to be on tonight, but his kid got sick.
His kid got sick.
And he's going to France. So probably not next week.
We are from France.
But we also have a friend named Sean that we've been talking about having on because he does graphic design work as a contractor.
Mm-hmm. He has been doing contract work for almost as long as I've known him. I mean, him and I started working together at a small little post-production house, and like since then he went and did his own movie, shot his own movie, wrote another movie. Him and I worked on a cartoon together, and yeah, he's a real good guy. He's also got he's got his own podcast as well. It's about board gaming.
It's called Tuesday Night Games.
Tuesday Night Games is his company. Tuesday Night Podcast is his podcast.
Is it not Tuesday Night Games Podcast?
It's Tuesday Night Podcast.
Oh, okay.
Even though they record it on like Thursday and then put it out on Tuesday.
I have a follow-up on the Cutting the Perfect Hole tutorial from last week. Somebody actually asked, they found the Pixel Lab did another version of how to do that and said you could do this too. And absolutely. Like I said, there's many ways to do it. The thing about Pixel Lab's version is you use the bevel tool and you use the subdividing in there. And when you do that, though, it creates all these weird pieces of geometry, which aren't necessarily all four-sided or all three-sided. And not only that, but it creates a lot of geometry. So then you're back to that whole thing where, like, all of a sudden you got a really complicated mesh going on. It's a little more clean looking than doing a bowl, of course, and it's very great if that's all you're doing. But the moment that you put a subdivision surface on top of it, it's going to fall all apart.
Yeah.
So that's another method, though. If you go look on the comments of that, there is that method if you want to use it. It is a little bit easier to do if you don't mind having all that geometry.
Yeah.
And I thought we'd follow up with Lance from last week. He got some good feedback on his reel, and a lot of the comments were about the music.
Yeah, I know. I was listening to it, and I'm like, did I just hear the F word in there? You know, I'm like,
oh yeah,
that's probably not a great idea to have on your reel.
Really? I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. Not if I'm sending it out.
I have a middle finger in mine.
I know. Yeah, but yours is funny. It's a foam finger.
Yeah. He did get a comment, and it was about one of the things he did in there. Apparently, was a video Copilot tutorial.
No.
Yeah, and
Which one was
mostly
that?
modified. It's like two metal doors closing, and it's mostly modified. And when I brought it up, he was like, "Oh man," he's like, "I didn't realize that. Like, I need to take that out of there."
That's funny.
Because see, Lance has done like literally like thousands of animations, and when you go back 4 or 5 years and you're going through your reel, like sometimes you do, like especially where we used to work together, that was just the thing. Like it didn't matter how you got it. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
You know, the end user
We created
doesn't care.
so many flying from spaces. It was unbelievable.
The problem was he forgot that was a video Copilot because he's done so many logos, and he's like, dang it. He's like, that's not good. And he's like, I feel like I need to go take that out now.
And I didn't notice it.
But I said, you know what? You have a job, and your reel right now is just for getting more work from clients. You're not using your reel right now to get a job. You're not sending your reel to another company and having them critique it and look at it to hire you. So I don't think it matters right now.
Right.
Even though I'm really big on never put tutorials or anything on your reel.
Right.
If somebody is looking to hire a graphic designer and they work for, a tile company, they are not going to know.
Right. Totally.
But definitely, I was like,
know
change it
your
if you're
audience,
looking for a job.
kind of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the last piece of follow up on tutorial stuff is somebody asked about how to render VR video straight from Cinema 4D. And for a long time, I didn't understand either exactly how to go about getting started in that. My first piece of advice would be to use a render engine that exports spherical or cubic projection, which is V-Ray and Octane. That's the first part and stereoscopic, because if you can do cubic stereoscopic projection, you can render out a video that'll play back in many video players on cell phones.
Cool.
On 3D cell phones. And the ORBX player for the what is it, the Samsung
VR?
Is it the Gear V? What is it called?
It's called the Samsung Gear VR.
Gear VR. There's an ORBX player that Otoy makes that will play that stuff back. That's how you go about doing it. Now, the only thing is, you're not going to have any control over anything going on in the scene. Your user basically is at the mercy of the camera. So if your camera is moving through something, that's what the user is going to see. They don't have control. They can't go left, right, up, and down like they would in a video game, which there's good and bad to that. Number one, nausea.
Yeah.
You have no control over it. So if you're moving around, move slow. If you're moving left and right, move very slow. Don't do any sudden rotation. The rotations get you the most nauseous.
Yeah.
If you have a nice, steady, slow move, you won't make your people nauseous. But the advantage to that is you can do a render that is super gorgeous. Whereas if you're doing Unreal Engine, it's not going to look as good. It's going to look like a video game. Of course, the gap between the two is slowly fading. Basically that was my advice I put in there. So cool. I would like to do a tutorial on that eventually, but that's going to be a bunch of work.
Yeah. We'll get to the drone tutorial first.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So, I'm waiting for them, by the way. I'm waiting for DJI to come out with the app for the Phantom 3 in order... I'm not DJI, I'm sorry, Pix4D to come out with the version of the app that works with the Phantom 3 so I can do that tutorial.
Yeah.
So, you want to introduce our Artist of the Week?
Sure. Artist of the Week.
Joe.
Just the regular. Oh.
Yeah, regular.
What's that?
Joe Selnikovic.
Yeah, Joe Selnikovic. He is a friend of ours. He is a kick butt. Super kick butt nuke artist, and Joe has been doing video production for ever. I want to say that his dad was in the his dad or granddad or something like that was in the industry and just took him around with him. So he learned to shoot, he learned to light, and then he got into post production. He's got a way of editing which is like totally foreign to me, and his stuff is really, really good. And so what's cool is, he is a great example of someone who sat down, did tutorials, read up on it, researched the stuff, didn't necessarily go to school specifically for that, but was able to learn entirely online just through books and stuff like that. And he taught himself nuke, and his nuke skills are awesome. He's
done a lot of FX PhD courses too. So he knows a lot about like color space and, a lot of that super detailed stuff in video that I kind of know, but
for sure.
It's just something Rec 709 or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and why it needs to be this, and, talking about C-Log and all those...
yes, for sure.
Technical details of camera formats and color formats and color spaces that I just haven't been enough to wrap my head around.
Yeah, totally.
There's some interesting stuff. When you're a compositor, you're not just doing, crazy special effects. There's things that you do, like, for example, in his reel, there's somebody who was in a shot and you could see the woman's back and she just had a really unsightly zipper on the back of her dress. It was distracting because she was in the foreground, and he had to do zipper removal. Make it look like the dress was just a normal black dress in the back. And
I really like the night to day stuff with the compositing the cell phone screen on there. That's pretty cool.
And there's another cell phone screen heated in there as well. And, he doesn't get too into detail in his breakdown of exactly what's going on. You'll miss it if you're not paying attention. But the girl in the photo is blowing a kiss. She's getting her video taken with an iPhone. She's blowing a kiss to the camera. Well, they shot her blowing the kiss to the camera 8 months later, and she was wearing a different dress.
Oh, jeez. I never knew that.
So she's not doing the same motion at all. It's a completely different shot, and she's wearing a different dress. And he had to go through, put the other dress on, make it match somehow, like change do variable speed on it, I believe, on the video to make it match the original, and then comp it into the scene.
Oh, jeez. And
he also starts out with a really cool comp that he did of a cricket player. So it's a good one.
Cool, man.
And we also have a listener artist of the week, which we're going to start doing. We got some submissions, and we're featuring Paul this week as a listener artist of the Brograph podcast.
You can check out his stuff at www.8bitmotion.com.
So we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. So that's all I got, man. You got anything else?
No. Tired. I'm sorry. It's been a long weekend.
I still have to edit this thing.
Yeah. Yep. I hit stop and then I send it off to you.
You jerk. Don't forget to please rate us on iTunes. If you like our show, we've been climbing in the ratings.
We were on new and noteworthy, like, I don't know, what did we get up to, like 16 or something like that?
We got up to 10 at one point.
That was pretty awesome.
But the thing is that you only
you're only there for 8 weeks.
Yeah, so
we're gone now.
We're gone. But it doesn't mean that our numbers aren't up and that we can't get in some of the other charts. And the only way that we can do that, besides people subscribing, is to rate us and possibly leave a review.
Yeah.
If you like us, please tell other people about us. One of the best things you could do is just share a link to the iTunes store on your Facebook or Twitter and tell people that you like our podcast.
Yep. Or if you want to advertise for us or show all your friends how cool you are, you could buy the t-shirt.
T-shirts are up.
We got the t-shirts last week. Oh man, they are so comfortable. Like it is going to be one of my favorite shirts, and like they said in Can't Hardly Wait, you never wear the t-shirt of the band that you're in. Oh, I'm going to because it is a super comfortable t-shirt. It's like the thin t-shirt material that like just breathes really well, and it fits. It's got a great fit to it.
Quality is good.
Quality is really good. Yeah.
And the shirt is on our website and is also on Amazon. If you want to just search for it on Amazon, you can find it that way, or it's plastered all over the site. You'll find it. And the thing about these shirts is it's not just cool looking and has our logo and helps advertise us in that way, but when you buy the shirt, which is affordably priced, you are helping to support us as well.
Totally.
We put out a lot of free content.
Yep.
And it helps us kind of survive and push things forward, because honestly, it'd be great if Brograph as a whole was just a business on its own at some point.
Totally. We'd love to do this. We only put out tutorials like maybe 1 or 2 a month, and we would love to be able to do it every week, podcast more than once, more often than we do. I'd love to do it like twice a week. But,
that'd be fun if it gets to that point, definitely.
Totally. So help support us. Buy a t-shirt. We got some more coming. I've got another one in the works in my head having to do with film,
Oh, yeah, you told me.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that one. So maybe, who knows, maybe in the next couple weeks, we'll get one of those as well.
And we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we are trying to do the Instagram thing.
Yeah.
course. And we're on Brograph.com, obviously, and YouTube. And YouTube is where you're going to find all of our stuff. And that's where our biggest audience is, of course, because that's where our tutorials are, which is youtube.com/Brograph tutorials. If you have not subscribed to us on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, and you will just automatically get all those updates. And the tutorials, like the second they come out, they'll go into your feed or whatever on YouTube.
Totally. All right, that's all I got.
Me too. We'll probably do this next week.
Yeah,
I guess.
More than likely. I mean, we got a lot of material, so.
Which is good.
Yep.
Which is real good. So, everybody have a good one. And until next week, I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt.
Have a good one.
Later, bros.
It's pretty good, I guess. Brograph.com, an online resource for learning critical components of Cinema 4D and After Effects, specifically catered to help you prevail as a motion graphic designer.
What's up, bros? Welcome to another Brograph motion graphics tutorial.
We give you professional time-saving tips, shortcuts, and lessons that help give you an edge over your fellow designers. Not only this, but our new Brograph Talks help you in your file management, hardware configuration, and client relations.
I love projects that scare me. When our art director comes to us and asks for something that I had never done before, man, it gets me pumped.
Join us for live sessions, check out our crazy Cinema 4D experiments, or just watch our Fun with Brograph series, where we show you practical applications for techniques learned in previous tutorials. Do this from the beginning, and your client is going to respect that, and they're going to respect you, and they're going to respect your time. Subscribe today and get automatic updates on the latest tutorials, tricks, tips, and inspiration brought to you by industry professionals Dave Koss and Matt Milstead, all with a slight dash of dry humor peppered in. Real nice banana.
Brograph.com, your source for tutorials that will help you thrive in the motion graphics industry. Don't just play around with Cinema 4D and After Effects, master it, and make money by becoming indispensable at your workplace.
We don't care how you get here, folks. Just get here. Subscribe now to Brograph Tutorials. It's pretty good, I guess.